Little girl grabbed the lost bride's hand. 18 years later, Mama returned, owning the valley. In the rugged wilderness of Montana Territory in 1885, a 6-year-old girl named Emma witnessed something that would change 2 lives forever, when a panicked bride in a torn wedding dress stumbled through the frontier forest, lost and crying. Little Emma didn't hesitate. She grabbed the stranger's hand and whispered, "Don't worry, I'll help you." 18 years later. In 1903, that same bride returned to the valley, but this time she wasn't running away. She was coming home as the owner of everything Emma's family had lost, carrying secrets that would reveal why she disappeared that fateful wedding day, and how a child's kindness had set in motion a chain of events that would transform their destinies forever. If this story has already captured your heart, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories, and comment below telling us where in the world you're listening from. We love hearing from our global family. The morning of June 15, 1885, dawned crisp and clear over the untamed wilderness of Montana Territory. 6-year-old Emma Rodriguez pressed her small nose against the single glass window of their log cabin, watching her father Miguel load hay onto their weathered wagon. The golden sunrise painted the rolling hills in warm amber hues, and the distant mountains stood like silent guardians over their small homestead carved from the frontier. "Mia, come eat your breakfast," called her mother Sophia from behind her. The scent of fresh cornbread and scrambled eggs filled the air, mixing with the aroma of strong coffee that seemed to be a permanent fixture in their humble home. Sophia Rodriguez had traveled north from Mexico 5 years earlier with Miguel, bringing with her recipes, traditions, and an unwavering determination that had helped them survive in this harsh but beautiful land. Emma reluctantly left her post at the window and climbed onto her chair at the rough-hewn wooden table Miguel had built with his own hands. Their cabin was simple but warm, with hand-woven blankets Sophia had made during the long winter months, and a few precious photographs in tin frames, their wedding portrait, Emma's first birthday, Miguel's pride, when he'd successfully delivered their first calf. "Papa looks worried," Emma observed, swinging her legs as she picked at her eggs. Through the window she could see Miguel's furrowed brow as he checked the harness on their 2 horses. "Thunder and lightning." Sophia's smile faltered slightly. "He's just thinking about grown-up things, sweetheart. Nothing for you to worry about." But Emma was perceptive for her age, and she'd noticed the hushed conversations that stopped when she entered the room, the way her parents' voices carried a tension that hadn't been there before. The truth was, the Rodriguez family was facing their greatest challenge. The territorial government had been pressuring small homesteaders to prove their claims, and rumors were spreading that a powerful cattle baron named Jeremiah Blackwood was buying up land throughout the valley. Their small cattle operation, which had sustained them since they'd staked their claim, was struggling against the harsh realities of frontier life. The brutal winter had killed several of their cattle, and wolves had taken even more. Miguel entered through the heavy wooden door, his worn boots heavy on the plank floor. At 35, he still carried himself with the quiet dignity that had first attracted Sophia, but the lines around his eyes had deepened with the constant worry of protecting his family in this unforgiving land. "The Hendersons are packing up," he announced quietly, hanging his hat on the peg by the door. Sophia's hand paused halfway to her coffee cup. The Henderson homestead bordered their property to the east, a struggling operation like theirs, where the family had been trying to make a go of it for 3 years. If they were leaving, it meant the pressures weren't limited to their small ranch. "Where are they going?" Sophia asked, though she dreaded the answer. "It's back east. Henderson says he can't fight Blackwood, and the man's been running cattle on Henderson's land, claiming it was never properly filed." Miguel's voice carried a mixture of resignation and anger. "Blackwood's offering to buy out anyone who'll sell, but for pennies on the dollar." Emma looked between her parents, sensing the gravity of the conversation, even if she didn't fully understand it. "Are we going to leave too, Papa?" Miguel knelt beside her chair, his calloused hands gentle as he smoothed her dark hair. "We're going to try very hard to stay. This land is our home, and homes are worth fighting for." After breakfast, Emma wandered outside to her favorite spot, a massive cottonwood tree that stood at the edge of their property, its branches creating a natural canopy over a small creek that meandered through the valley. She'd built a little house there from twigs and stones, and she often came to think or simply watch the world go by. The morning was peaceful, with only the sound of water trickling over stones and the distant lowing of cattle. Emma was arranging new wildflowers around her little house when she heard something unusual, the sound of someone crying. Following the sound, she pushed through a thicket of wild roses and emerged into a small clearing she'd never explored before. There, sitting on a fallen log with her face in her hands, was the most beautiful woman Emma had ever seen. She wore a white dress that looked like something from the fancy pictures in her mother's treasured catalog from back east, with intricate lace and tiny pearls that caught the morning light. But the dress was torn and dirty, and the woman's elaborate hairstyle was coming undone. Emma approached cautiously, the way her father had taught her to approach wild animals. "Are you hurt, ma'am?" The woman looked up, revealing tear-streaked face paint and eyes the color of summer sky. She appeared to be in her early 20s, with golden hair that fell in waves around her shoulders. When she saw Emma, she tried to compose herself, wiping at her tears with a lace handkerchief. "Oh, child, I'm sorry. I didn't know anyone was here." Her voice carried a refined Eastern accent, something cultured and different from the frontier speech Emma was used to. "You're wearing a wedding dress," Emma observed with the directness of childhood. "Are you getting married?" Fresh tears spilled down the woman's cheeks. I was supposed to be married this morning, but ... double quotes, she trailed off, looking lost and vulnerable in the vast wilderness. Emma's heart went out to this beautiful, sad woman. Without hesitation, she reached out and took the stranger's gloved hand. "Don't worry, I'll help you," she said with the absolute certainty that only children possess. "My mama always says that when people are in trouble, we should be kind to them." The woman stared down at Emma's small hand in hers, and something shifted in her expression. The despair began to give way to wonder, as if she couldn't quite believe this child's immediate compassion. "What's your name, sweetheart?" the woman asked, her voice gentler now. "Emma Rodriguez." "What's yours?" The woman hesitated for a moment, as if deciding whether to trust this little girl with the truth. "My name is Catherine Whitmore. That's a pretty name. Why are you crying, Miss Catherine?" Catherine looked around the peaceful clearing, taking in the wildflowers and the gentle sound of the creek. "I was supposed to marry someone today, but I realized I couldn't do it. He wasn't a good man, so I ran away." Emma nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense. "My mama says it's better to be brave and do the right thing, even when it's scary." "Your mama sounds very wise." Catherine squeezed Emma's hand gently. "But now I'm lost, and I don't know where to go. This wilderness is so vast, and I'm not used to ... double quotes. "You can come to our cabin," Emma exclaimed, her face lighting up with a solution. "Mama and Papa always help people. Mama makes the best cornbread, and Papa can fix anything. They'll know what to do." Catherine felt a warmth spread through her chest at this child's innocent generosity. In her world of Eastern society and wealth, kindness often came with expectations and social obligations. But Emma's offer was pure, uncomplicated by adult concerns about propriety or benefit. "Are you sure your parents wouldn't mind a stranger showing up at their door?" "They won't mind," Emma said with absolute confidence. "Come on, I'll show you the way. But we should be careful. Papa says there might be wolves around." As they walked hand in hand through the forest, Emma chattered about her life, her parents' small ranch, her favorite horse named Star, the little house she'd built by the creek. Catherine listened with growing amazement at this child's simple, joyful existence, so different from the complicated, restrictive world she'd just escaped. They emerged from the trees to see the Rodriguez cabin nestled in the valley below, smoke curling from the stone chimney and laundry hanging on a rope line in the morning breeze. It looked rustic but welcoming, a testament to human determination in the face of wilderness challenges. "There's our home," Emma announced proudly, "and there's Mama tending the garden." "Mama," she called out, waving her free hand. "I found someone who needs help." Sophia looked up from where she was pulling weeds from their vegetable patch, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern as she took in the sight of her daughter holding hands with a young woman in a torn wedding dress. But true to Emma's prediction, there was no hesitation in Sophia's response. She immediately dropped her gardening tools and hurried toward them, wiping her hands on her apron. "Dios mío, what happened to you, señorita?" Sophia asked, her maternal instincts overriding any questions about who this stranger might be. Catherine stood frozen for a moment, overwhelmed by the genuine concern in Sophia's eyes. In her 22 years of life in Boston's high society, she had rarely encountered such immediate, unconditional kindness from a stranger. Sophia Rodriguez, with her weathered hands and simple cotton dress, radiated a warmth that Catherine's own mother, with all her silk gowns and social connections, had never possessed. I was supposed to be married this morning," Catherine managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I couldn't go through with it. I ran into the forest and became lost." Sophia's expression softened with understanding. She had heard whispers in town about the grand wedding planned at the Blackwood Ranch. The cattle baron's son was to marry some Eastern heiress. The whole territory had been talking about it for weeks, about the fancy guests arriving by train and the elaborate preparations. "You must be exhausted, Mia," Sophia said, using the same endearment she reserved for Emma. "Come, let's get you inside and cleaned up. Miguel," she called toward the barn. "We have a guest who needs our help." Miguel emerged from the barn, his expression shifting from curiosity to recognition as he took in Catherine's elaborate dress and refined bearing. He had seen her once before, riding in Jeremiah Blackwood's fancy carriage through town, but he said nothing, simply tipping his hat respectfully. "Ma'am," he greeted her simply, "you're welcome in our home." Inside the cabin, Sophia bustled about, heating water for washing and preparing a simple meal. Catherine sat at the wooden table, still holding Emma's hand, marveling at the stark difference between this humble home and the opulent mansion where she had spent the previous night. Here, there were no servants, no crystal chandeliers, no imported furniture, yet there was something precious here that all her family's wealth had never purchased: genuine peace. "Tell me, Senorita," Sophia said gently as she placed a cup of chamomile tea before Catherine, "what made you run from your wedding?" Catherine's hands trembled slightly as she lifted the cup. The story she was about to tell was one she had never spoken aloud, not even to her own family. "My name is Catherine Whitmore. My father owns textile mills in Boston, and he arranged my marriage to Thomas Blackwood." Miguel's jaw tightened at the mention of the name, but he remained silent, allowing Catherine to continue. "I had never met Thomas until 3 days ago, when I arrived by train for the wedding. My father said it was a good match, that the Blackwood family controlled vast amounts of land and cattle, and that our union would benefit both families' business interests." Catherine's voice grew stronger as she spoke, as if finally giving voice to her fears was liberating. "But Thomas, he frightened me." Emma leaned closer, her young face serious. "Was he mean to you?" Catherine nodded, tears threatening again. "He spoke to the servants like they were animals. He bragged about driving homesteaders off their land, about using fear and intimidation to expand his father's holdings. And the way he looked at me, ... double quotes, she shuddered, like I was just another piece of property he was acquiring." Sophia reached across the table and covered Catherine's hand with her own. "You were right to run, Mia. A marriage should be built on love and respect, not fear. But I have nowhere to go," Catherine. "My father will be furious. He's already received payment from Jeremiah Blackwood, a substantial sum that will help expand our mills. If I don't marry Thomas, it will ruin both families' business arrangements." Miguel finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "A woman's life is worth more than any business arrangement." Catherine looked at him with surprise. In her world, men rarely spoke of women's rights or feelings. Business and profit were the primary concerns, and women were expected to comply with arrangements made for the family's benefit. "The Blackwoods will come looking for you," Miguel continued. "They won't let their son's bride simply disappear without consequences." "I know," Catherine whispered. "That's why I can't stay here. I won't bring trouble to your family after you've shown me such kindness." "Nonsense," Sophia said firmly. "You'll stay until we can figure out a safe plan. Emma, show Miss Catherine to the loft where she can rest." As evening approached, Catherine found herself helping Sophia prepare dinner, something she had never done in her privileged life. Her hands, soft from a lifetime of labor, struggled with the simple tasks of peeling potatoes and eating bread, but Sophia was patient, teaching her with gentle guidance. "In my family," Sophia explained as they worked, "we believe that honest work brings dignity. It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, everyone should know how to care for themselves and others." Catherine absorbed this wisdom, realizing how helpless her upbringing had made her. She had been educated in literature, music, and social graces, but she knew nothing about the practical skills needed for survival. That night, as Catherine lay in the small loft above the main room, she listened to the Rodriguez family's evening routine. Miguel read aloud from a worn Bible while Sophia mended clothes by lamplight, and Emma played quietly with a doll Sophia had sewn from scraps of fabric. Their contentment was palpable, their love for each other evident in every small gesture and gentle word. For the first time in her life, Catherine understood what a real family looked like. The next morning brought unwelcome visitors. Catherine was helping Sophia tend the chickens when they heard the thunder of approaching horses. Through the cabin window they could see a group of riders led by a man Catherine recognized with dread, Thomas Blackwood himself, accompanied by his father Jeremiah and several ranch hands. "Hide in the root cellar," Miguel instructed Catherine quickly. "Emma, take her there now." Emma grabbed Catherine's hand and led her to a concealed door in the cabin floor. The root cellar was dark and cramped, filled with preserved vegetables and supplies for winter. But Catherine crouched there silently, her heart pounding as she heard heavy boots on the cabin's front porch. Rodriguez. Jeremiah Blackwood's voice boomed through the thin walls. "We're looking for a young woman who went missing yesterday. Eastern lady, blonde hair, wearing a wedding dress." "You seen anyone like that?" "No, Señor," Miguel replied calmly. "We've been working our land. Haven't seen any strangers. Mind if we look around?" Thomas's voice was sharp with suspicion. "That little Mexican girl of yours was seen in the forest yesterday. Maybe she saw something." Catherine could hear Emma's small voice, steady and brave. "I was playing by the creek, but I didn't see any lady in a wedding dress." The lie came so naturally, so protectively, that Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes. This child was risking trouble with dangerous men to protect her. "The girl could be anywhere in these mountains," Jeremiah said after a tense silence. "Probably dead by now if the wolves didn't get her." "City folk don't last long in the wilderness. We'll keep an eye out," Miguel offered. "If we see anything, we'll send word to town." After the riders left, Catherine emerged from the cellar shaking with relief and gratitude. "You lied for me," she said to Emma, kneeling to the child's level. "You could have gotten in trouble." Emma's response was simple and profound. "You're part of our family now. Families protect each other." Over the following days, Catherine began to understand what Emma meant. The Rodriguez family didn't just offer her shelter, they welcomed her completely into their lives. Sofia taught her to cook, to preserve food, to tend the garden. Miguel showed her how to care for the animals, how to read the weather, how to survive in the wilderness. Emma shared her favorite places, her games, her innocent wisdom about life. In return, Catherine shared her education. She taught Emma to read more advanced books, helped Sofia with calculations for their small business selling eggs and vegetables in town, and used her knowledge of business to help Miguel understand the legal documents that kept arriving from territorial officials. But most importantly, Catherine began to discover who she really was beneath the layers of social expectations and family pressure. Here, in this simple cabin, she found strength she never knew she possessed, purpose she had never experienced, and love that asked for nothing in return. As weeks turned into months, Catherine's transformation was remarkable. Her soft hands grew calloused from honest work, her pale skin bronzed from days in the mountain sun, and her timid demeanor gave way to quiet confidence. She learned to milk cows, to shoot a rifle for protection against predators, to navigate the forest trails without fear. The Rodriguez family never asked her to leave, never made her feel like a burden. They simply accepted her as one of their own, and Catherine began to understand that this was what home truly meant. But she also knew that her presence put them in danger. The Blackwoods continued to search for her, and their pressure on small homesteaders was intensifying. Several more families had sold out and left the valley, and rumors persisted that Jeremiah Blackwood was planning something that would drive out the remaining settlers once and for all. One evening in late autumn, as they sat around the fire after dinner, Catherine made a decision that would change all their lives forever. "I have to leave," she announced quietly. The family looked at her in shock. Emma immediately protested. "But you're part of our family now." "I am," Catherine said, her voice thick with emotion. "And that's exactly why I have to go. As long as I'm here, you're all in danger. The Blackwoods won't stop looking for me, and they're already making life difficult for homesteaders. I won't be the reason you lose your home." Miguel and Sofia exchanged glances, understanding the truth in her words even as their hearts broke at the thought of losing her. "Where will you go, Mia?" Sofia asked gently. Catherine had been thinking about this for weeks. East, but not to Boston. "I have an aunt in Chicago who never approved of my father's business methods. She might help me start a new life." She paused, looking around at the faces that had become so dear to her. "But I promise you this, someday I'll come back, and when I do, I'll make sure the Blackwoods can never hurt this family or anyone else in this valley." It was a bold promise from a young woman who had arrived helpless and afraid, but something in Catherine's voice convinced them she meant every word. The morning of Catherine's departure dawned crisp and clear, with the first hints of winter frost glittering on the cabin's wooden walls. Sofia had spent the night preparing supplies for Catherine's journey: dried meat, hardtack, warm clothing, and a small pouch containing every spare coin the family possessed, despite Catherine's protests. "You take this, Mia," Sofia insisted, pressing the pouch into Catherine's hands. "It's not much, but it will help you get started in Chicago." Catherine's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the meager savings the Rodriguez family had worked so hard to accumulate. "I can't take your money. You need it for Emma's future, for the farm." "Family helps family," Miguel interrupted gently. "Someday, when you're able, you can help other families the way we're helping you now." Emma had been unusually quiet all morning, clinging to Catherine's skirts as she moved about the cabin. Finally, as Miguel prepared the horse and wagon for the journey to the nearest town where Catherine could catch the eastbound stage, Emma spoke up. "Will you really come back, Mama Catherine?" The name stopped Catherine cold. Somewhere during her months with the Rodriguez family, Emma had begun calling her Mama Catherine, and Catherine had never corrected her. Now, hearing it spoken with such hope and trust, Catherine knelt down and took Emma's small hands in hers. "I promise you, no matter how long it takes, no matter what I have to do, I will come back to you. And when I do, I'll make sure no one can ever threaten our family again." Emma nodded solemnly, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object, a smooth river stone she had painted with berry juice to look like a heart. "So you don't forget us," she whispered. Catherine clutched the stone to her chest, overwhelmed by the simple, profound gesture. "I could never forget you, Emma. Never." The journey to town was bittersweet. Miguel drove the wagon while Catherine sat beside him, memorizing every detail of the landscape she was leaving behind: the towering pine trees, the crystal-clear streams, the majestic mountains that surrounded the valley like protective guardians. "The Blackwoods will keep pressuring families to sell," Miguel said quietly as they traveled. "Without outside help, I don't know how long we can hold on." "How long do you think you have?" Catherine asked. Miguel was silent for a long moment. "Maybe 2 years if we're lucky. Jeremiah Blackwood has been buying up water rights, and he's got the territorial government in his pocket. He's patient, but he's also ruthless. Eventually, he'll find a way to force us out." Catherine filed this information away, already beginning to formulate plans. 2 years. She had 2 years to build something powerful enough to stand against the Blackwood Empire. At the stage station, their goodbye was brief but intense. Catherine hugged Miguel tightly, thanking him for treating her like a daughter. She promised Sophia she would write as soon as she reached Chicago safely. And she held Emma for a long moment, whispering promises and reassurances that she prayed she would be able to keep. As the stagecoach pulled away, Catherine watched through the small window until the Rodriguez family disappeared from view. Then she turned her face toward the uncertain future. Emma's painted stone clutched in her hand and began planning her return. 18 years later, 1903. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Clearwater Valley as a magnificent black carriage, pulled by 4 perfectly matched horses, made its way along the mountain road. The carriage bore no family crest or identifying marks, but its obvious expense and the quality of its appointments spoke of significant wealth and power. Inside the carriage, a woman sat with perfect posture, her elegant traveling dress of deep blue silk complemented by a hat adorned with ostrich feathers. At 39, Catherine Whitmore, now Catherine Morrison, had fulfilled the promise of beauty she had shown as a young bride. But there was something more in her bearing now: confidence, authority, and a steely determination that had been forged through years of struggle and triumph. The scared young woman who had fled into the forest 18 years ago was gone, replaced by someone who had built an empire through intelligence, perseverance, and an unwavering commitment to the promise she had made to a little girl with painted stones. Catherine's journey to this moment had been neither easy nor straightforward. Her aunt in Chicago had indeed welcomed her, but with conditions. Margaret Whitmore had been estranged from Catherine's father for years due to his ruthless business practices, and she agreed to help Catherine only if she promised never to contact her family again. "If you want to be free of your father's control," Margaret had said, "you must be willing to give up his money and his name entirely." Catherine had agreed without hesitation. Under her aunt's guidance, she had learned to navigate the business world as an independent woman, a nearly impossible task in the 1880s, but not entirely without precedent. Margaret owned several boarding houses and had taught Catherine the fundamentals of property management, investment, and the delicate art of building wealth while maintaining a respectable reputation. But Catherine's real education had come from the people she met in Chicago's immigrant communities, families much like the Rodriguez family, struggling to build new lives in America while facing discrimination and exploitation. She had seen how the wealthy and powerful used their influence to keep the poor in poverty, and she had made it her mission to level that playing field. Her first major success had come when she exposed a corrupt city official who was taking bribes to ignore unsafe working conditions in the textile mills. The scandal had brought down several prominent businessmen, including one of her father's associates, and had established Catherine's reputation as someone who could not be intimidated or bought. From there, she had built a network of allies lawyers who believed in justice. journalists who valued truth, and business people who understood that ethical practices could be profitable. She had invested wisely, buying properties in growing neighborhoods and businesses that served working families. She had also married briefly and strategically a wealthy widower named James Morrison, who had died of pneumonia after only 2 years of marriage, leaving her his considerable fortune and the social standing that came with his respectedness. But through all her successes, through all the years of building wealth and influence, Catherine had never forgotten the promise she had made to Emma Rodriguez. Every decision she made, every investment she chose, every alliance she forged was guided by a single goal: returning to the Clearwater Valley with enough power to protect the families there from predators like the Blackwoods. Now, as her carriage approached the valley she had left so long ago, Catherine felt a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. Would the Rodriguez family still be there? Would Emma remember her? And most importantly, would she be strong enough to keep the promise she had made to a 7-year-old girl who had called her Mama? The valley looked much the same as she remembered, though there were fewer homesteads visible from the road. Several properties showed signs of abandonment: collapsed fences, overgrown fields, empty cabins with broken windows. Catherine's jaw tightened as she saw the evidence of the Blackwoods' systematic campaign to drive out the small farmers and ranchers. But as they rounded a familiar bend in the road, Catherine's heart leaped with relief. There, nestled in the grove of pine trees she remembered so well, stood the Rodriguez cabin. It looked older, more weathered, but it was still there, and smoke was rising from the chimney. "Stop here," Catherine instructed her driver, a loyal employee who had accompanied her from Chicago. As the carriage came to a halt, Catherine took a deep breath and stepped down onto the dusty road. She had imagined this moment countless times over the years, but now that it was here, she felt suddenly uncertain. 18 years was a long time. People changed. Circumstances changed. What if she was no longer welcome? What if her promise had been forgotten? But as she walked up the familiar path to the cabin door, those doubts faded. This was home, the only real home she had ever known, and she had come back, just as she had promised. Before she could knock, the door opened, and Catherine found herself face to face with Sofia Rodriguez. The years had added lines to Sofia's face and silver to her hair, but her eyes were the same, warm, kind, and immediately recognizing. "Dios mío," Sofia whispered, her hand flying to her heart. "Catherine, is it really?" "Hello, Sofia," Catherine said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "I told you I would come back." Sofia's eyes filled with tears as she reached out to touch Catherine's face, as if to confirm she wasn't dreaming. "Mia, you came back to us. You really came back." "Where is Emma?" Catherine asked, looking past Sofia into the cabin. "Is she?" "Emma?" Sofia called, her voice shaking with joy. "Emma, come quickly. Someone is here to see you." Footsteps approached from inside the cabin, and then a young woman appeared in the doorway. Catherine's breath caught in her throat. Emma was 25 now, no longer the little girl who had grabbed her hand in the forest, but a beautiful woman with her mother's gentle eyes and her father's strong bearing. She wore a simple dress of blue cotton, and her dark hair was braided down her back in the style Catherine remembered Sofia favoring. For a moment Emma stared at Catherine in confusion, clearly trying to place the elegant stranger who had brought tears to her mother's eyes. Then recognition dawned, and Emma's hand flew to her mouth in shock. "Mama Catherine?" she whispered, using the name she had called her so many years ago. Catherine nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Emma flew into her arms with the same spontaneous affection she had shown as a child, and Catherine held her tightly, feeling 18 years of separation melt away in an instant. "You came back!" Emma sobbed against Catherine's shoulder. "You really came back, just like you promised." "I told you I would," Catherine whispered, stroking Emma's hair. "I told you I would come back and make sure no one could hurt our family again, and I meant every word." As the three women sat around the familiar wooden table in the Rodriguez cabin, Catherine listened with growing anger to the story of what had transpired during her 18-year absence. The situation was even worse than she had feared. "The Blackwoods have been relentless," Miguel explained, his voice heavy with exhaustion. He looked older than his years, his hair now completely gray, and his hands bearing the calluses and scars of decades of hard labor. "They've bought out or forced out nearly every family in the valley. We're one of only 3 homesteads left." Sofia poured coffee from a battered tin pot, her movements careful and economical. Catherine noticed that the coffee was weak, stretched to make their meager supplies last longer. The cabin itself showed signs of financial strain, patched clothing hanging on pegs, furniture that had been repaired multiple times, and a general air of making do with very little. "How have they been pressuring you?" Catherine asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Emma's jaw tightened as she spoke. Every way you can imagine. They've diverted water from the creek that feeds our cattle. They've had their men drive cattle across our fields, trampling our crops. They've spread rumors in town that we're harboring criminals or diseased livestock. And when none of that worked, they started making direct threats. What kind of threats? Catherine's voice was dangerously quiet. Miguel and Sophia exchanged a worried glance. Last month, Jeremiah Blackwood himself rode up to our door, Miguel said. He told us we had until the end of this year to sell to him, or he'd find other ways to acquire our land. He was very specific about what those other ways might include. Catherine felt the familiar cold fury that had driven her through 18 years of building power and influence. What did he offer you for the land? $50, Emma said bitterly. For 160 acres that we've worked and improved for over 20 years. Land that's worth at least 10 times that amount, and if you refuse. Sophia's voice was barely a whisper. He said accidents happen to families who don't know when they're beaten. He mentioned that our cabin is very isolated, and that it would be a shame if something happened to it during the winter when help is so far away. Catherine set down her coffee cup with deliberate care, her mind already working through the implications and possibilities. The Blackwoods had grown bold in their tactics. Confident that no one in the territory had the power or influence to challenge them, they were about to learn how wrong they were. Tell me about the other families who are still here, Catherine said. There's the Hendersons about 5 miles north, Emma replied. They have a small cattle ranch, but they're struggling, and the Kowalskis who run a grain farm near the river. Both families have children, and both are terrified of what might happen if they don't sell. Catherine nodded, filing away the information. And what about the families who have already sold? Where did they go? Some moved further west, trying to start over in Oregon or California, Miguel said. Others gave up farming altogether and moved to the cities. A few. He paused, his expression darkening. A few had accidents before they could make the decision to sell. What kind of accidents? Catherine's voice was sharp. Barn fires. Cattle poisoning. One family's well was contaminated with something that made them all sick, Sophia explained. Nothing that could be proven, of course. But everyone knew who was responsible. Catherine felt her resolve hardening into something diamond-sharp. The Blackwoods weren't just greedy. They were murderers. And they had been terrorizing innocent families for years while she had been building her fortune in Chicago. How large is the Blackwood operation now? She asked. Emma stood and walked to a rough map that hung on the cabin wall, a hand-drawn representation of the valley that Miguel had created to keep track of which properties had been sold or abandoned. Red X marks covered most of the map. They own about 80% of the valley now, Emma said, pointing to the marked areas. They've built a massive ranch house on the hill overlooking the river, and they have over 200 men working for them, cowboys, ranch hands, and what they call security personnel. Everyone knows the security men are really hired guns. Catherine studied the map, her strategic mind automatically assessing the situation. The Blackwoods had indeed built an impressive empire. But empires could fall just as quickly as they rose, especially when they were built on intimidation and illegal tactics. What about the law? Catherine asked. Surely the territorial marshal, Miguel laughed bitterly. Marshal Thompson is on the Blackwood payroll, has been for years. Any complaints against them mysteriously disappear, and anyone who pushes too hard finds themselves facing trumped-up charges. And the territorial government? Same story, Emma said. Jeremiah Blackwood has connections all the way to the territorial capital. He's been talking about running for territorial legislature himself. Catherine absorbed this information with growing determination. The Blackwoods had built their power on the assumption that they were dealing with isolated, powerless farmers who had no recourse against wealth and influence. They'd never faced someone who understood their game and could play it better than they. I need to see the legal documents for your land claim, Catherine said, and I want to know everything about the Blackwood operation. How many men they employ, where their money comes from, what their business relationships are, and most importantly, what illegal activities they might be vulnerable to prosecution for. Sophia looked confused. Mia, what are you planning? The Blackwoods are too powerful, even if you've done well for yourself in Chicago. This isn't something that can be solved with money alone. Catherine smiled, and for the first time since her arrival, Sophia saw a glimpse of the steel that lay beneath her elegant exterior. You're right, Sophia. This can't be solved with money alone. But money is just one tool in my arsenal. I've spent 18 years learning how to fight people like the Blackwoods, and I've gotten very good at it. She reached into her traveling bag and pulled out a leather portfolio. From it, she extracted several official-looking documents and spread them on the table. "These are the deeds to 12 properties I've purchased in Montana Territory over the past 5 years," Catherine explained. "I've been preparing for this day for a long time. I own mineral rights, water rights, and transportation routes that the Blackwoods don't even know exist yet. I also have detailed files on Jeremiah Blackwood's business practices, his political connections, and his financial vulnerabilities." Emma stared at the documents in amazement. "You've been planning this for years." "I've been planning this since the day I left," Catherine confirmed. "Every investment I made, every alliance I formed, every skill I developed was with this moment in mind. The Blackwoods think they're dealing with helpless farmers, but they're about to discover they've made a very powerful enemy." Miguel leaned forward, hope beginning to replace the despair in his eyes. "What do you need from us?" "I need you to trust me," Catherine said simply, "and I need you to be patient for just a little while longer. The Blackwoods have spent years building their empire through fear and intimidation. I'm going to tear it down using the law, public opinion, and their own greed against them." She reached across the table and took Emma's hands in hers, just as she had 18 years ago, when Emma was a frightened little. "I made you a promise," Catherine said softly. "I promised I would come back and make sure no one could hurt our family. I intend to keep that promise, but I'm going to do more than just protect you. I'm going to make sure the Blackwoods never threaten another family in this valley again." Emma squeezed Catherine's hands, tears streaming down her face. "I never stopped believing you, even when things got so bad that Papa wanted to sell. Even when Mama cried herself to sleep at night worrying about what would happen to us. I knew you would keep your promise. And I have," Catherine said firmly. "Now let's get to work." As the afternoon sun slanted through the cabin windows, Catherine spread out maps, documents, and detailed plans across the Rodriguez family's kitchen table. For the first time in years, the cabin was filled not with fear and desperation, but with hope and determination. The war for Clearwater Valley was about to begin, and this time, the Blackwoods would discover what it meant to face an enemy who fought with both heart and mind, who had the resources to match their wealth and the moral authority they had never possessed. Catherine Morrison had come home, and she had come to win. The next morning, Catherine rose before dawn and dressed in her finest traveling outfitter, burgundy wool dress with intricate beadwork and a matching hat that spoke of wealth and sophistication. She had learned long ago that first impressions were crucial in business, and today she would be making several very important first impressions. "Where are you going so early, Mija?" Sophia asked, emerging from the kitchen with a cup of coffee. "To town," Catherine replied, adjusting her gloves with practiced precision. "It's time to introduce myself to the good people of Clearwater and begin dismantling the Blackwood Empire." Emma appeared in the doorway, still in her nightgown. "Should we come with you?" Catherine shook her head. "Not today. Today I need to establish my presence and credibility without any connection to your family. The Blackwoods can't know yet that I'm here specifically to help you. Let them think I'm just another wealthy investor looking for opportunities." Miguel emerged from the barn, having finished the morning chores. "Be careful, Catherine. The Blackwoods have eyes and ears everywhere in town. Word of your arrival will reach them within hours." "I'm counting on it," Catherine said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I want them to know I'm here. I want them curious, maybe even a little worried. Confident enemies make mistakes, but worried enemies make bigger ones." Catherine's driver, Thomas, had the carriage ready and waiting. As they made their way toward town, Catherine reviewed her strategy one final time. She had spent years studying the Blackwood operation from afar, using her network of contacts to gather information about their business practices, their political connections, and most importantly, their vulnerabilities. The town of Clearwater had grown considerably since Catherine's last visit, 18 years ago. What had once been a small frontier settlement now boasted a main street lined with shops, a hotel, a bank, and even a small newspaper office. But Catherine could see the Blackwood influence everywhere in the well-dressed men who lounged outside the saloon despite the early hour, in the nervous glances of shopkeepers, and in the general air of tension that hung over the supposedly prosperous community. Catherine's first stop was the Clearwater Bank, a modest but well-built structure that served as the financial heart of the valley. She entered with the confidence of someone accustomed to being taken seriously in business matters, her expensive clothing and obvious wealth immediately drawing the attention of the bank employees. "Good morning," she said to the young clerk behind the counter. "I'd like to speak with the bank president about some significant financial transactions." The clerk, clearly flustered by Catherine's elegant appearance and authoritative manner, stammered, "Of course, ma'am. Mr. Patterson will see you right away." Henry Patterson, the bank president, was a nervous man in his 50s who had clearly learned to be very careful about which customers he pleased and which he disappointed. When Catherine was ushered into his office, she could see him trying to assess whether she represented an opportunity or a threat. "Mrs. Morrison," Catherine said, extending her hand in a firm handshake, "I represent several investment groups from Chicago and New York who are interested in opportunities in Montana territory." Patterson's eyes lit up at the mention of Eastern investment money. "Please, have a seat. What kind of opportunities are you considering?" Catherine settled herself in the chair across from Patterson's desk and opened her leather portfolio. "My associates are particularly interested in mineral rights, water rights, and transportation infrastructure. We understand that this valley has significant untapped potential." She placed several official-looking documents on Patterson's desk, legitimate investment proposals that she had prepared with the help of her business associates in Chicago. The numbers were impressive enough to command respect, but not so large as to seem impossible. "These are preliminary proposals," Catherine continued, "but before we proceed, I need to understand the current business climate in the valley. I'm told that most of the land is now controlled by a single family, the Blackwoods." Patterson's expression became guarded. "The Blackwoods are indeed the largest landowners in the area. They've built a very successful ranching operation." "I'm sure they have," Catherine said smoothly. "But my investors prefer to work in markets where there's healthy competition and transparent business practices." "Can you tell me about the other significant landowners in the valley?" Patterson shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Well, there are a few smaller operations, but most of the independent farmers and ranchers have found it advantageous to sell their properties to the Blackwoods." "Advantageous how?" Catherine pressed. "Were they offered particularly generous terms?" The banker's discomfort was obvious now. "Mrs. Morrison, I think it would be best if you spoke directly with Mr. Jeremiah Blackwood about business opportunities in the valley. He's very influential in all major decisions here." Catherine smiled, recognizing the fear in Patterson's voice. "Of course, I'll certainly want to meet with Mr. Blackwood, but first, I'd like to make some immediate investments to demonstrate my group's serious intent." She reached into her portfolio and withdrew a bank draft that made Patterson's eyes widen. "I'd like to open an account with a deposit of $50,000, and I'm prepared to offer immediate cash purchases for any properties that might become available." The amount was staggering. By frontier standards, more money than most people in the valley would see in a lifetime. Patterson's hands actually shook as he examined the bank draft, which was drawn on a prestigious Chicago bank and bore all the proper seals and signatures. This is quite substantial," Patterson managed. "I'll need to verify the draft, of course, but assuming everything is in order, everything is in order," Catherine assured him. "And there's more of where that came from, assuming we find the business climate here suitable for our purposes." As Patterson busied himself with the paperwork for opening her account, Catherine casually asked, "I don't suppose any properties have come on the market recently? I'm particularly interested in parcels with water access." Patterson glanced up nervously. "Well, there are a few families who might be considering selling their properties, but you'd really need to speak with Mr. Blackwood about it. He handles most of the major land transactions in the valley." "I see," Catherine said, filing away this confirmation of the Blackwood monopoly. "And where might I find Mr. Blackwood?" "He has an office above the general store, but he spends most of his time at the ranch. It's the large spread about 10 miles north of town. You can't miss it." Catherine completed her banking business and left. Patterson, with instructions to send word immediately if any properties became available for purchase. As she walked back to her carriage, she was aware of the curious stares and whispered conversations her presence had generated. Word of the wealthy Eastern investor would spread quickly through the small town. Her next stop was the office of the Clearwater Gazette, the town's weekly newspaper. The editor, a thin man named Samuel Wright, looked up from his printing press with ink-stained fingers and a harried expression. "Mrs. Morrison," Catherine introduced herself. "I represent investment interests from back east, and I'm considering some significant business ventures in your valley. I was hoping you might be able to provide me with some background information about the area." Wright's expression became cautious. "What kind of information are you looking for?" Catherine had researched Wright before her arrival and knew that he had once been a crusading journalist in Denver before moving to Clearwater for his health. She suspected he chafed under the restrictions that the Blackwood influence placed on his reporting. "I'm interested in the economic development of the valley over the past decade," Catherine said carefully. "Population trends, major business developments, that sort of thing. My investors like to understand the full picture before committing significant resources." Wright studied her for a long moment, clearly trying to decide how much he could safely say. "The valley has seen considerable consolidation in recent years. Most of the small farms and ranches have been absorbed into larger operations. That suggests efficient market forces at work," Catherine observed. "Were the smaller operators unable to compete economically?" Wright's jaw tightened slightly. "You could say that, though some folks might argue that the competition wasn't entirely fair." Catherine leaned forward slightly, sensing an opportunity. "Mr. Wright, I can see that you're a man who values accuracy and truth in reporting. My investors have had unfortunate experiences in other territories where business practices weren't entirely ethical. We prefer to invest in communities where there's transparency and fair dealing." Wright glanced toward the window, then back at Catherine. "Mrs. Morrison, if you're planning to invest significant money in this valley, you should know that there are complications that don't always make it into the official records." "What kind of complications?" Wright was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with his conscience. Finally, he spoke in a low voice. "There have been incidents. Accidents that some folks think weren't entirely accidental. Families who were pressured to sell under circumstances that weren't entirely voluntary. Business practices that might not stand up to scrutiny from territorial authorities." Catherine nodded gravely. "I appreciate your candor, Mr. Wright. My investors will certainly want to take such factors into account. Perhaps you could provide me with copies of your back issues. I'd like to review the local news coverage of these business developments." Wright hesitated, then nodded. "I can do that. But Mrs. Morrison, be careful who you talk to about these matters. Not everyone in town appreciates questions about certain business practices." As Catherine left the newspaper office with a stack of back issues under her arm, she felt a grim satisfaction. Wright's carefully worded warnings confirmed everything she had suspected about the Blackwood operation. More importantly, she had identified a potential ally, someone who might be willing to help expose the truth when the time came. Her final stop of the morning was the general store, where she made several purchases while engaging the proprietor in casual conversation about the town and its prominent citizens. By the time she returned to her carriage, Catherine had accomplished several important objectives. She had established her presence as a wealthy investor. She had gathered intelligence about the current situation, and she had planted seeds of curiosity and concern about her intentions. Most importantly, she had sent a clear message to anyone who might be watching. Catherine Morrison was not a helpless farmer or a frightened homesteader. She was someone with serious money and serious connections, and she was asking serious questions about the Blackwood Empire. As her carriage made its way back toward the Rodriguez homestead, Catherine allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. The first phase of her plan was complete. Now it was time to wait and see how the Blackwoods would respond to the news that a new player had entered their game. She had no doubt that Jeremiah Blackwood would want to meet with her very soon, and when he did, she would be ready for it. Catherine didn't have to wait long for Jeremiah Blackwood's response. The next morning, as she sat with the Rodriguez family planning her next moves, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention to the window. A group of 6 riders was making its way up the dusty path to the cabin, led by a man whose bearing and expensive clothing marked him as someone accustomed to command. "That's him," Miguel said grimly, peering through the curtain. "That's Jeremiah Blackwood." Catherine felt her pulse quicken, but her expression remained calm and controlled. She had been preparing for this moment for 18 years, and she was ready. "Emma, Sophia, I want you both to stay inside and let Miguel and me handle this. Don't say anything unless you're directly asked a question." She smoothed her dark blue traveling dress and checked her appearance in the small mirror by the... Everything about her presentation needed to convey wealth, confidence, and power. She was no longer the desperate young woman who had fled this valley 18 years ago. She was Catherine Morrison, successful businesswoman and formidable opponent. The riders pulled up in front of the cabin in a cloud of dust. Jeremiah Blackwood dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who had spent his life on horseback, but Catherine could see the calculation in his eyes as he surveyed the modest homestead. He was a tall man in his 50s, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of commanding presence that came from years of getting his way through intimidation and wealth. Miguel stepped out onto the porch first, his posture respectful but not subservient. "Mr. Blackwood, what brings you to our place?" Blackwood's attention, however, was focused entirely on Catherine as she emerged from the cabin. His eyes took in every detail of her expensive clothing, her confident bearing, and the unmistakable aura of someone who was accustomed to being taken seriously in business matters. "You must be Mrs. Morrison," Blackwood said, removing his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "I'm Jeremiah Blackwood. I understand you've been asking questions about business opportunities in our valley." "Mr. Blackwood," Catherine replied with a polite nod. "How kind of you to ride all this way to introduce yourself. I was planning to call on you at your ranch later this week." Blackwood's smile was predatory. "No need for such formality between business people. I thought it might be more convenient to meet here, since you seem to have taken an interest in the Rodriguez property." The implied threat was clear. Blackwood was letting her know that he was aware of her connection to the family and that he considered this his territory. Catherine, however, refused to be intimidated. "Actually, I'm staying here as a guest while I evaluate various investment opportunities throughout the territory," Catherine said smoothly. "The Rodriguez family has been kind enough to offer me their hospitality while I conduct my business in the area." "How generous of them," Blackwood said, his tone suggesting anything but appreciation for the family's generosity. "I understand you've made quite an impression at the bank." $50,000 is a substantial sum to invest in our little valley. Catherine was impressed despite herself. Blackwood's intelligence network was even more efficient than she had expected. Patterson had clearly reported her visit within hours of her departure. "That's merely the initial deposit," Catherine replied casually. "My associates and I are prepared to invest considerably more, assuming we find suitable opportunities and appropriate business conditions." Blackwood's eyes sharpened at the subtle emphasis on appropriate business conditions. "And what exactly would constitute appropriate business conditions, Mrs. Morrison?" Catherine smiled, recognizing the opening she had been hoping for. "Transparent transactions, fair market prices, and assurance that our investments won't be subject to the kind of complications that sometimes arise in frontier territories." "I'm not sure I understand what you mean by complications," Blackwood said, though his tone suggested he understood perfectly. "Oh, I think you do," Catherine replied, her voice remaining pleasant but gaining an edge of steel. "My investors have had unfortunate experiences in other territories where certain individuals used intimidation and illegal tactics to manipulate land prices and eliminate competition. We prefer to invest in communities where business is conducted according to proper legal and ethical standards." The silence that followed was thick with tension. Blackwood's men shifted restlessly in their saddles, clearly recognizing the challenge in Catherine's words. Miguel stood frozen on the porch, hardly daring to breathe as he watched the confrontation unfold. Blackwood's facade of courtesy finally slipped, revealing the cold calculation. "But, Mrs. Morrison, I think there may be some misunderstanding about how business is conducted in this valley. Perhaps you've been listening to the complaints of people who simply weren't suited to the demands of frontier life." "Perhaps," Catherine agreed. "Or perhaps I've been listening to the accounts of people who were subjected to criminal intimidation and illegal business practices. My investors take such matters very seriously, Mr. Black. We have extensive connections with territorial authorities, federal marshals, and congressional representatives who oversee territorial governance." Blackwood's expression darkened. "Are you threatening me, Mrs. Morrison?" Catherine's smile was as cold as winter wind. "Not at all, Mr. Black. I'm simply explaining the standards my investors require. We believe in conducting business according to the law, and we expect our business partners to share those values. And if they don't, then we find other partners," Catherine said simply. "And sometimes we find it necessary to report illegal activities to the appropriate authorities. My investors have a reputation to protect, and we can't afford to be associated with criminal enterprises." The word criminal hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet. Blackwood's face flushed with anger, and his hand moved instinctively toward the gun at his hip. His men tensed, ready to follow their leader's example, but Catherine didn't flinch. Instead, she reached into her reticule and withdrew a small leather folder, which she opened to reveal an official-looking badge and identification papers. "I should mention," she said conversationally, "that in addition to my business interests, I also serve as a special investigator for the Territorial Development Commission. We're tasked with ensuring that federal land grants and territorial resources are being used in accordance with the law." The badge was genuine. Catherine had cultivated relationships with territorial officials during her years in Chicago, and her reputation as a successful businesswoman had earned her the honorary position. It carried real authority, including the power to initiate federal investigations into territorial business practices. Blackwood stared at the badge, his mind clearly racing as he reassessed the situation. This was no longer a simple matter of intimidating a wealthy investor. He was facing someone with official government, connections, and the power to bring federal scrutiny to his operations. "I see," he said finally, his voice carefully controlled. "I wasn't aware that you held an official position, Mrs. Morrison." "I don't advertise it," Catherine replied, returning the badge to her. "I prefer to conduct my investigations quietly, without causing unnecessary alarm. But I want to be completely transparent about my authority and my intentions." Blackwood remounted his horse, his movements sharp with barely controlled anger. "Mrs. Morrison, I think you'll find that business in this valley operates according to well-established customs and practices. I hope your investigation won't be influenced by the complaints of people who simply weren't successful in their endeavors. My investigation will be influenced only by facts and evidence," Catherine replied. "I'm sure a successful businessman like yourself has nothing to worry about from a thorough review of local business practices." "Of course not," Blackwood said through gritted teeth. "I look forward to working with you, Mrs. Morrison. I'm sure we can find mutually beneficial opportunities for your investors." "I'm sure we can," Catherine agreed. "Assuming, of course, that all business is conducted according to proper legal standards." As Blackwood and his men rode away, Catherine remained on the porch until they disappeared from sight. Only then did she allow herself to release the breath she had been holding. The confrontation had gone better than she had hoped. She had established her authority, put Blackwood on notice, and demonstrated that she was not someone who could be easily intimidated. Miguel emerged from the cabin, his face pale with shock. "Catherine, do you realize what you just did? You practically declared war on the most powerful man in the territory." Catherine turned to him with a smile that was both fierce and determined. "Miguel, I didn't declare war on Jeremiah Blackwood. I've been at war with him for 18 years. Today, I simply let him know that the war has begun." Emma and Sophia appeared in the doorway, their faces reflecting a mixture of fear and admiration. "What happens now?" Emma asked. "Now we wait," Catherine replied. "Blackwood will spend the next few days trying to verify my credentials and assess the threat I represent. He'll discover that everything I told him is true. I do have the authority to investigate territorial business practices, and I do have powerful connections in Chicago and Washington. And then," Catherine's expression grew grim, "then he'll try to eliminate the threat. He'll either attempt to buy me off, discredit me, or ... double quotes." She paused, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "Or he'll try more direct methods." Sophia crossed herself. "Mia, perhaps this is too dangerous. Perhaps we should just sell the land and leave." Catherine took Sophia's hands in hers, just as she had 18 years ago, when she had made her promise to return. "Sophia, I didn't come back here to run away again. I came back to end this once and for all. Jeremiah Blackwood has terrorized this valley for too long, and it's time someone stood up to him." "But what if he tries to hurt you?" Emma asked, her voice filled with concern. Catherine's smile was cold and confident. "Let him try. I'm not the frightened young woman who left here 18 years ago. I've learned how to fight people and I've learned how to win." As the family gathered around the kitchen table to discuss their next moves, Catherine felt a deep satisfaction settling in her chest. The first battle had been fought and won. Jeremiah Blackwood now knew that he faced a formidable opponent, someone who couldn't be intimidated or bought off. The war for Clearwater Valley had truly begun, and Catherine Morrison was ready for whatever came next. For 3 days after the confrontation, an uneasy quiet settled over Clearwater. Catherine used this time wisely, riding into town each morning to continue building relationships with local merchants and gathering more intelligence about Blackwood's operations. She also sent several carefully worded telegrams to her contacts in Chicago and the territorial capital, ensuring that her presence and activities were officially documented. On the 4th morning, the Blackwood counterstrike began. Catherine was in Patterson's office at the bank, reviewing property records and discussing potential investments, when Deputy Marshal Tom Bradley burst through the door without ceremony. Bradley was a thin, nervous man in his 30s who had held his position for less than a year, position that everyone in town knew he owed to Jeremiah Blackwood's influence. "Mrs. Morrison," Bradley announced, his voice shaking slightly with either excitement or fear, "I need to speak with you about some serious allegations that have been brought to my attention." Catherine looked up from the ledger she had been examining, her expression calm and mildly curious. "Of course, Deputy. What can I help you with?" Patterson shifted uncomfortably behind his desk, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. The banker had spent the last few days walking a careful line between his fear of Blackwood and his growing respect for Catherine's obvious wealth and connections. I've received reports that you've been making false claims about your authority and credentials, Bradley continued, pulling a folded paper from his vest pocket. Specifically, that you've been impersonating a federal official and threatening legitimate businessmen with fraudulent investigations. Catherine's eyebrows rose slightly, but her voice remained perfectly controlled. That's a very serious accusation, Deb. May I ask who filed this complaint? That's not important right now, Bradley stammered. What's important is that these are federal crimes we're talking about. Impersonating a federal official, making false threats, attempting to extort money from local businesses, double quotes Deputy Bradley. Catherine interrupted gently, before you continue with these accusations. I think you should see something. She reached into her reticule and withdrew not only the badge and identification she had shown Blackwood, but also a thick envelope containing official correspondence. She spread the documents across Patterson's desk with deliberate care. This is my official appointment as a special investigator for the Territorial Development Commission, she said, pointing to the first document. This letter is from Territorial Governor Samuel Crawford, confirming my authority to investigate land use and business practices in Montana Territory. And this telegram, which arrived yesterday, is from Congressman William Morrison of Illinois, my late husband's brother, expressing his support for my work here. Bradley's face went pale as he examined the documents. Each one bore official seals, signatures, and letterheads that would be impossible to forge. Patterson leaned forward to get a better look, his expression shifting from nervous concern to barely concealed amazement. As you can see, Catherine continued, my credentials are entirely legitimate. I have not impersonated anyone, nor have I made any false threats. I have simply informed certain individuals that illegal business practices will not be tolerated and that such activities will be reported to the appropriate authorities. Bradley's hands shook as he handed the documents back to Catherine. I was told that ... Someone said you were ... double quotes. Someone lied to you, Deputy, Catherine said firmly. The question is whether that someone was deliberately trying to use you to harass a federal official, or whether they simply didn't bother to verify the facts before filing a false complaint. The implications of her words hung heavy in the air. If Blackwood had knowingly filed false charges against a legitimate federal investigator, he had committed a serious crime. If he had simply been careless with the facts, he had made himself look foolish and incompetent. I think, Catherine continued, that you should be very careful about who you trust with information in the future, Deputy. False accusations against federal officials can have serious consequences for everyone involved. Bradley nodded frantically and practically ran from the bank, leaving Catherine and Patterson alone. The banker sat back in his chair, wiping sweat from his forehead, despite the cool morning air. Mrs. Morrison, Patterson said quietly, I think you should know that Blackwood isn't going to stop here. When this doesn't work, he'll try something else. I'm counting on it, Catherine replied, carefully returning her documents to her reticule. Every move he makes against me creates more evidence of his illegal activities, and every failed attempt makes him look weaker to the people who currently support him out of fear. That afternoon, Catherine received confirmation that her strategy was. Sarah Mitchell, the general store owner, approached her as she was leaving the bank. Mrs. Morrison, Sarah said quietly, glancing around to make sure they weren't overheard. I wanted to thank you for what you're doing. Most of us have been too scared to speak up, but we've all seen what Blackwood does to people who cross him. What exactly have you seen, Mrs. Mitchell? Catherine asked. Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. Mysterious fires that destroy crops just before harvest. Cattle that disappear in the night. Accidents that happen to people who refuse to sell their land. And anyone who complains to the law finds that Deputy Bradley is always too busy to investigate. Catherine nodded grimly. Would you be willing to provide a written statement about these incidents? If you can guarantee my family's safety, Sarah replied. Blackwood has made it clear what happens to people who cause him trouble. I can guarantee more than your safety, Catherine said. I can guarantee that Jeremiah Blackwood will never be in a position to threaten anyone in this valley again. That evening, as Catherine sat with the Rodriguez family around their kitchen table, she shared the day's developments. Miguel listened with growing amazement as she described Bradley's failed attempt to arrest her and Sarah Mitchell's offer to provide testimony. People are starting to believe that someone can actually stand up to Blackwood, Miguel said. For years, everyone has been too afraid to even talk about what he does. Fear has been his greatest weapon, Catherine agreed. But fear only works when people believe they have no choice. Once they see that there's an alternative, that someone with real power is willing to fight back, everything changes. Emma, now a young woman of 21, had been listening intently to the conversation. "Catherine," she said, "I want to help. I know this valley and these people better than anyone. I can talk to families who might be afraid to approach you directly." Catherine studied the young woman who had once been the frightened child clinging to her skirts. Emma had grown into someone with her mother's compassion and her father's quiet strength. But there was something else there too, a determination that reminded Catherine of herself. "It could be dangerous, Catherine. Blackwood won't hesitate to threaten you if he thinks you're working against him. He's already threatened us," Emma replied. "Now 18 years our family has lived under his threats. At least now we have a chance to fight back." Sophia reached across the table to take her daughter's hand. "Mia, are you sure about this?" Emma's smile was fierce and determined. "Mama, you taught me that sometimes we have to stand up for what's right, even when it's scary. Catherine stood up for us when she was just a stranger. Now it's our turn to stand up for our neighbors." Catherine felt a surge of pride and affection for the young woman Emma had become. "All right," she said, "but we do this carefully and systematically. We document everything, we protect our witnesses, and we build a case that will stand up in federal court over the next several days." Catherine and Emma worked together to quietly contact families throughout the valley. The stories they heard were remarkably consistent, a pattern of intimidation, property destruction, and economic manipulation that had been going on for years. The Hendersons had lost their barn to a mysterious fire just days after refusing to sell their land to Blackwood. The Johnsons had found their prize bull dead in the pasture, apparently poisoned after they had complained about Blackwood's men driving cattle across their property. The Williamses had been forced to sell their ranch for a fraction of its value after a series of accidents had destroyed their equipment and injured their workers. Each family had been afraid to speak up, knowing that Deputy Bradley would either ignore their complaints or report them directly to Blackwood. But with Catherine's official authority and her promise of federal protection, they began to find their courage. By the end of the week, Catherine had collected sworn statements from 15 families detailing a pattern of criminal activity that stretched back over a decade. She also had documentary evidence of property transfers that had been completed under obvious duress, often for prices far below market value. But Blackwood wasn't sitting idle while Catherine built her case. On Friday evening, as Catherine was returning to the Rodriguez cabin from town, she noticed that she was being followed. 3 riders had been maintaining a careful distance behind her for the last several miles, close enough to keep her in sight, but far enough away to avoid direct confrontation. Catherine didn't change her pace or give any indication that she had noticed her pursuers, but her mind was racing. This was exactly the kind of escalation she had been expecting. Blackwood had tried legal intimidation through Deputy Bradley and had failed. Now he was moving to more direct methods. As she approached the cabin, Catherine made a decision that would prove crucial to everything that followed. Instead of riding directly to the Rodriguez property, she took a detour that led her past the small church that served the scattered families of the valley. Reverend Thomas Mackenzie was tending to his small garden behind the church when Catherine rode up. The elderly minister looked up in surprise, then noticed the riders in the distance who quickly turned away when they realized they had been spotted. "Mrs. Morrison," Reverend Mackenzie said, "is everything all right?" "I'm not sure, Reverend," Catherine replied, dismounting from her horse. "I seem to have attracted some unwanted attention, and I thought it might be wise to have a witness present." The minister's expression grew grave. "Come inside," he said. "We can watch from the window and see what they do, from the safety of the church." Catherine and Reverend Mackenzie watched as the 3 riders circled the area for several minutes before finally riding away. But Catherine knew this was just the beginning. Blackwood was testing her defenses, looking for vulnerabilities he could exploit. "Reverend," Catherine said, "I think it's time for the people of this valley to know exactly what they're facing. Would you be willing to help me organize a community meeting?" Mackenzie nodded grimly. "It's past time for this community to stand together against the evil that's been plaguing us. I'll speak to the families this Sunday, and we'll arrange a meeting for next week." As Catherine finally made her way back to the Rodriguez cabin, she felt a mixture of anticipation and determination. The battle lines were now clearly drawn, and both sides were preparing for the final confrontation. Jeremiah Blackwood had ruled Clearwater Valley through fear and intimidation for too long, but Catherine Morrison had returned with the power, authority, and determination to end his reign of terror once and for all. The war for the soul of the valley was about to reach its climax. What did you think of Catherine and Emma's incredible journey from that fateful day in the Old West to building a thriving community This story shows us that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change everything. If this story touched your heart and kept you on the edge of your seat, please give it a like. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We bring you amazing, heartwarming stories like this one every week.